was our 50th anniversary dinner when my son-in-law leaned toward the waiter and said, "Loud enough for the next table to hear it too. Separate checks. We're not covering them." My daughter didn't look up from her wine. My wife, Faye, 50 years my wife that very week, just kept folding her napkin into smaller and smaller squares, the way she does now when the world stops lining up for her. I didn't say a word. I let him say a word. I let him think I hadn't heard. But when the check came, I stood up out of that chair, and I said one short thing that drained the blood right out of his face. Before I go on, I'd like to know where you're listening from tonight. Drop your term in the comments. I read every one, and it does something for an old man to picture all of you out there. Some of the details in here I've softened or changed, the way you do when real life is too sharp to hand over plain. But the bones of it are true, and the lesson cost me more than I'd ever wish on you. My name's Calvin. Most everyone in Marion, Ohio just calls me Cal. I climbed poles for the Rural Electric Co-op for 31 years, through ice storms and August heat that took the sweat right off your back, and I retired in 2009 with a decent pension, a paid-off house on Bellefontaine Avenue, and a wife who still laughed at my jokes after 4 decades of hearing them. I thought I'd done it right. I thought I'd built something that would hold. We had 2 kids. Wade was the older one, our boy, and then our daughter. Wade and I never could find the same key to stand in. He left for Cincinnati at 19, mad about something I can't even fully name anymore. And the years just kept widening the gap until it was a canyon neither of us knew how to holler across. He passed in 2016. Liver. I got the call from a hospital social worker, not from family, and I drove down that I-71 in the dark doing 80 with my hands shaking on the wheel, and I got there 40 minutes too late to say a single thing to him. I'll carry that the rest of my days. You don't get over a thing like that. You just learn to set it down for a few hours at a time. So after Wade, my daughter was all the children we had left, and God help me I poured everything into her. In 2014, my mother passed and left me the family farm out past LaRue, 110 acres of good bottom ground that had been in the family since my granddad cleared it. Faye and I weren't farmers. We weren't going to work it, and the upkeep alone was eating us. So we sold it. After the lawyers and the taxes, we cleared a little over $300,000. Now, here's where I need you to hear me, because folks always want to call a man a fool at this part. We didn't give it all away. We weren't stupid with it. We kept the house. We kept my pension and our Social Security and a separate account for ourselves. But our daughter and her husband, my son-in-law, Grant, they came to us with this plan, a franchise, a car detailing and quick lube outfit they wanted to open out by the bypass. They'd done the spreadsheets. They had a folder full of projections that looked real enough. And our daughter sat at my kitchen table with tears in her eyes and said, "Dad, we just want a shot at the kind of life you and Mum built. What do you say to that?" We gave them $200,000, half the farm. I told Grant, this isn't a loan and it isn't charity. It's a head start. Your job now is to be worth it. He shook my hand and looked me dead in the eye and said, "I won't let you down, Cal." I relieved him. That was my first mistake, and it wasn't even close to my last. The business limped along for a couple of years and then folded. That happens. Businesses fail. It's not a sin. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't learn until much later, was where a chunk of that money had actually gone. But I'll get to that. For a long stretch, things were ordinary. We were the kind of family that did Sunday dinners and 4th of July at the lake. I taught Grant how to change his own brakes. I'd have done anything for any of them. Then in the spring of 2019, Faye started losing words. They came on small. She'd reach for a refrigerator and come up empty, just point and laugh it off. She put the quarter's phone in the freezer, and we made a joke of it. But the jokes ran out. By the next year, a neurologist in Columbus was saying the word Alzheimer's to us in a beige room, and Faye reached over and squeezed my hand under the table, and I realized she was comforting me. That was her, all the way down. 50 years, and she was still the steady one. Here's the thing, nobody tells you until you're standing in the middle of it. Medicare does not pay for the kind of care a person with dementia eventually needs. It'll cover a hospital stay, a doctor, some rehab, But the long, grinding day after day of memory care, the locked unit, the aides who keep your wife from wandering into traffic at 2 in the morning, that's called custodial care, and Medicare won't touch it. Not $1. And it runs 7,000–8,000 a month. More. I kept her home as long as my body would let me. I learned to do her hair. I learned to tell the same 5 jokes that still made her smile because she'd forgotten the punchlines. But the night she didn't know me, looked right at me on our own back porch and asked, polite as anything, when her husband was coming home. That was the night I knew I couldn't keep her safe by myself anymore. We found a place, a good one, the kind with a garden, courtyard, and aides who actually knew her name. $7,500 a month. We drained our own savings in 11 months. Then I started selling things, my tools, my granddad's deer rifle. And when the account that was supposed to cover the next quarter came up empty in a way that didn't make sense, that's when I went down to the bank and asked them to print me everything. I want to tell you about that morning, because it's the morning everything turned. I was sitting in a little glass cubicle at the credit union, and a young teller slid a stack of statements across the desk, and I started going down the columns with my reading glasses pushed up on my forehead, and the numbers stopped making sense. Withdrawals I never made, transfers to an account I didn't recognize, 18,000 here, 22 there, going back over 2 years. Now you have to understand something. After Faye's diagnosis, we'd done the responsible thing. We'd set up a durable power of attorney, the legal paper that lets someone act on your behalf when you can't. And because my hands were for caring for Faye, and because my daughter said, "Dad, let me take some of this off your plate," we'd named her and Grant on the financial end. To help, to pay the facility, manage the bills, the things I was too exhausted to chase. They'd been helping themselves. The transfers all landed in an account under a company name I didn't know, some LLC Grant had set up. I sat in that glass box, and the teller asked if I was all right, and I said yes, fine. And I wasn't fine. I was $68,000 short of fine. Money that was supposed to be keeping my wife safe had been bleeding out a hole I couldn't see, into my son-in-law's pockets, while I sold my own tools to make up the difference. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I want you to understand why, because I've turned it over 1,000 times since. If I'd marched over there hollering, "What did I have? A stack of statements and a broken heart," Grant would have had a story for it. "Cal, those were facility payments. We can explain. You're confused. You're under a lot of stress." And the worst part, they could have used it against me, a grieving old man, exhausted, accusing his own family. They'd have painted me as losing my own grip, maybe even tried to fold me into the same paperwork they'd folded Faye into. I'd seen a fellow from my Eagles Lodge get put under guardianship by his own kids over less. Once they control the paper, they control you. So I went quiet, and I got smart. I drove to Columbus, and I found an elder law attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Renfro, who'd spent her whole career on exactly this kind of rot. I laid it all on her desk. She read for a long while without saying anything, then took off her glasses and said, "Mr. Ardmore, what your son-in-law did has a name. It's financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. In Ohio, that's a felony." And then she asked me the question that I think saved what was left of my life. "Do you want to confront them, or do you want to win?" I said I wanted to win. So over 8 weeks, quietly, in the cracks of time between visiting Faye and not sleeping, we built it. We revoked the power of attorney, pulled the legal authority right out from under them. And they didn't even know it yet. We pulled every statement, every transfer, every forged signature, and Ms. Renfro had a forensic fellow lay it out clean. We filed a report with Adult Protective Services, and the piece I'm proudest of, the one that mattered most, we took our house, the paid-off house on Bellefontaine, that they were already circling, and we moved it into an irrevocable trust where they could never touch it. Because here's what I'd figured out by then. The anniversary dinner they'd generously planned for us wasn't a celebration. It was a closing. I'd overheard them, 2 months back, in the hallway outside Faye's memory care room. They didn't know I'd stepped out to take a call and come back soft-footed in my work boots. My daughter was saying the facility was an awful lot of money to be pouring into someone who doesn't even know what year it is, and Grant said, and I can still hear the flatness in it, we need to get Cal to sign the house over before it eats the rest. Medicaid'll take it anyway if we don't. Might as well be us. Might as well be us. About the home where they learn to walk. I stood in that hallway with my back against the cinder block, and I didn't make a sound. Through the little window I could see Fay in her chair by the courtyard glass, watching the birds, peaceful as a child, and something in me that had been bending for years finally set itself straight and went cold and quiet and sure. So, the dinner. They'd booked a fancy place down in the short north in Columbus, the Coppersmith, white tablecloths, and a wine list thicker than a phone book. My daughter framed it as a gift. 50 years, Dad. You and Mum deserve to be spoiled. I knew exactly what the night was supposed to be. They'd soften us with crab cakes and a toast, and then somewhere around dessert, Grant would slide a folder across the table. He loves a folder. And there'd be papers about protecting the family's assets, and a pen, and a lot of warm talk about doing what's best for Mum. I got there early, and I asked to speak to the manager. Fellow named Devon, maybe 35, real decent eyes. I took out an envelope. Inside was $1,200 in cash, and I want you to know what that cash was, because it matters. I'd sold my truck for it, a 1978 Ford F100 Calypso Green, that I'd kept running for 40-some years and rebuilt the engine on twice. My accounts were a mess by then, half of them tangled up in the very fight we were having, and I needed clean money in my own hand. So I sold the truck to a young guy out in Caledonia who whistled when he saw it, and I drove home in his cousin's car, and I didn't let myself look back at it in the lot. I handed Devon the envelope. Tonight my daughter and her husband are taking my wife and me to dinner, I said. When the check comes, I need you to tell the table it's already taken care of. I paid it. Whatever the bill runs, this covers it, and if it doesn't, you tell them it's covered anyway. Devon's eyebrows went up. He asked, careful, Sir, is everything all right with your family? And I said, No, son, it isn't, but it's going to be. He looked at me a long second, then folded that envelope away and said, I've got you. Fay and I came in at 6. She had on her good blue cardigan, and one of the aides had set her hair, and there were a few minutes in the car where she was so present, so herself, that she put her hand on my knee and said, Cal, you look handsome. Where are we off to? And I told her our anniversary, and she said, 50 years. My word, did we have fun? And I said, buckets of it. And she laughed, and for that one stretch of road it was just us, the way it always been. My daughter and Grant were already at the table. Smiles like store window mannequins. Grant stood and shook my hand. Cal, happy anniversary! He had the folder. It sat by his plate the whole meal like a third guest nobody mentioned. The dinner went about how you'd think. They ordered big, a $40 steak for Grant, 2 bottles of wine, the seafood tower. They talked over Fay's head as if she were a colt on the back of the chair. A couple of times she tried to follow the conversation and got lost, and my daughter would say, Mum, just eat your soup, in that flat, tired voice, and Fay would go back to folding her napkin smaller and smaller. About the time the plates were cleared, Grant flagged the waiter, a young man named Kyle, and that's when he said it. He leaned in and told Kyle to spit the checks, and then he added it, loud enough on purpose. We're not covering them. The 2 of them are on their own. A few heads turned the nearby tables. My daughter studied her wineglass, and Fay, God, this is the part that I'd undo if I could undo anything. Fay understood just enough. She didn't know the whole shape of it, but she heard the cruelty in it, the way an animal hears a storm coming. She set down her napkin, and her chin started to tremble, and she looked at me, lost and ashamed of something that was never hers to be ashamed of, and she whispered, Cal, did I do something wrong? And that was the moment, friends. Not the anger. I'd had the anger banked and cold for weeks. It was her asking me if she'd done something wrong in front of the 2 people who'd been robbing the roof from over her head that put me up out of my chair. I'll tell you, there was a young woman a couple of tables over who'd had her phone up for a minute already. I'd half noticed her, the way you do. Turned out she'd seen the whole thing coming before I did. But I'll get to her. I stood up slow. I put my hand on Faye's shoulder, gentle, and I said to her, "No, sweetheart, you didn't do one thing wrong. You never have." Then I looked at Grant. That's when Devon, the manager, came across the room right on cue, calm as Sunday, and stopped at our table. He looked at Kyle, then at the four of us, and he said, "Clear enough for the room. There won't be any checks tonight. The gentleman already settled the entire bill this afternoon. In cash." You should have seen Grant's face do the math. "What do you mean, he settled it? Settled it when?" Devon looked at me, asking permission with his eyes, and I gave him a small nod. "At 3 o'clock this afternoon," Devon said. $1,200. In advance. My daughter's mouth came open. "Dad, you didn't have to do that. We were going to—" "You were going to what?" I said, and I let it sit there because we all knew the answer was nothing. They were going to split the check and stick me and my sick wife with our own anniversary dinner, in front of strangers, the same week she forgot my name on our own back porch. The room had gone quiet around us. Forks down. That young woman with the phone hadn't moved a muscle. "I paid for tonight," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I'd have bet, because I knew exactly what you'd do the second the bill landed. And you did it. You didn't disappoint me, Grant. I just stopped letting you have the chance to. Then I reached down beside my chair, and I picked up my own folder. I'd been carrying one too. They just didn't know it. I want to slow down here, because what came next I'd planned out for weeks, and I'd promised myself I'd do it like a man and not a lunatic. No yelling, just the truth, laid out flat where everyone could see. I opened it, and I took out the first page, and I set it on the white tablecloth between the wine bottles. "This," I said, "is the deed to the farm out by LaRue. And this, second page, is the wire from 2014. $200,000 from your mother and me to you to start your business. We didn't ask for it back. We called it a head start." I looked at Grant. "Do you remember what you told me when you shook my hand?" He didn't answer. His jaw was working, but nothing came out. "You said you wouldn't let me down." My daughter had her hand over her mouth. A woman 2 tables over had tears standing in her eyes already, and she didn't even know the half of it yet. I laid down the next page. "This is my wife's memory care invoice, $7,500 a month. Care she needs to stay alive and safe because the disease in her brain doesn't care how much we love her." I set it down beside the wire. The contrast was the whole point. One sheet of paper showing everything we'd handed them. One showing what it was costing us to survive. Then I laid down the rest. And I didn't do it all at once. I dealt them out one at a time, slow like cards, because I wanted them to feel the length of it. "Bank statement," I said. $18,000 transferred out of our account in March of last year to an LLC registered to you, Grant." Down it went. Another. $22,000 that June. Down. "Power of attorney, the one you two said would take the burden off me. Used 11 times to move money you were never given the right to move." Down. "Forged signature. That's my hand on the bottom there, except I never signed it, because I was at the dentist that morning and I'd got the appointment card to prove it." Down, 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 down. $68,000, I told the table, when you add it all up. 68,000, drained out of the account that was supposed to keep their mother safe, while I sold my tools and my granddad's rifle and, this very afternoon, my truck, to cover what they'd stolen. The whole restaurant had stopped. I could hear the kitchen door swing somewhere far off. Faye had gone quiet too, watching me, and I don't know how much she followed, but she reached up and took my hand off her shoulder and held it in both of hers. Grant found his voice, and it came out ugly. "You can't just— half of that was facility payments. You're confused." "Then you'll have no trouble," I said, explaining it to the detective from the Marion County Prosecutor's Office, who already has copies of every one of these, or to the woman from Adult Protective Services, who opened a case 3 weeks ago. I let that land, and the power of attorney you're so fond of. I revoked it last Tuesday. You haven't had a dime of authority over us in 11 days. You just didn't bother to check." My daughter made a sound I'd never heard her make. She turned on Grant, turned right on him at the table, and said, "You told me those were the bills. You told me you were handling the bills." And I watched it cross her face, the first real understanding of what she'd let her name be put to, and it half broke my heart even then, even after everything. I had one more page, the one I'd saved. "And the house," I said. "Quiet now. The one you two were going to ask me to sign over tonight, after the wine and the toast. The house your brother learned to ride a bike in front of." I set it down. "It went into a trust 11 days ago. You will never own it, you will never sell it. The only thing you were ever going to get from me tonight was a pen, and I'm afraid I left it at home." That's when the young woman with the phone stood up. I figured her for a stranger who'd recorded something she'd post and forget. She came over slow, and she was crying, and she looked at me like she was trying to memorize my face. She said, "You don't know me, but I've been looking for you for 3 years." And she set her phone down on the table, screen up, on a photograph. It was Wade, my boy, younger than I'd ever known him, holding a baby in a hospital blanket. "My name's Marin," she said. "Wade was my father. You're my grandfather." I had to sit down. My legs just quit. 50 years married, 3 decades up on the poles, and a snip of a girl I'd never met took the strength right out of my knees with one sentence. She'd grown up in Cincinnati. Wade had told her, before he died, that he had a father in Marion who he wasn't sure would want to know her. She'd been afraid to come. She'd seen my daughter's social media a year back, some smiling post about taking care of our parents, and something hadn't sat right, and she'd started watching. That night, she told me later, she'd come to the restaurant on a hunch because my daughter had posted that they were celebrating Mum and Dad, and Marin had wanted, just once, to see her grandfather across a room. She'd seen the whole thing instead, and she'd kept her phone steady through every minute of it. I'm going to tell you how it ended, because I know you'll want to know, and because some of you are sitting where I was sitting, wondering if it's even worth fighting. The video Marin took, plus everything Miss Renfro had built, made it a short fight in the end. Grant was charged that for financial exploitation of an elderly person, forgery, theft. His lawyer talked a big game about my confusion, right up until they laid the LLC records next to the wire transfers, and then the talk stopped. He took a plea rather than face a jury who'd seen the video, and he's doing 6 years in Marion Correctional, which is a strange thing, him being locked up 40 minutes from the house he tried to steal. We recovered a good portion of the money. Not all. The truck's gone for good, and I've made my peace with that. My daughter is a harder story, and I won't lie to you and make it tidy. She wasn't the architect, but she signed her name, and she looked away when looking away was easier, and she let her mother be humiliated at her own anniversary dinner. There were months where I couldn't stand the sight of her. She filed for divorce from Grant before his trial even started, and then she started showing up at the memory care place. Not for me. I made that part clear, that this wasn't about getting back in my good graces. For her mother, she'd sit with Faye and brush her hair and read her the same magazine article 4 times because Faye liked the pictures. She did that for a year before I could bring myself to set a place for her at my table again. I won't tell you I've forgiven her clean. Forgiveness like that doesn't come in one piece. It comes in chips over a long time, and some days I find a new one, and some days I lose one I thought I'd found. But she's my daughter, and Faye lights up when she walks in, even now, even when she can't name her. And I've decided that a person who comes back and does the unglamorous work, the hairbrushing, the bad day visits, the cleaning up after a mess they helped make, is a person you let keep trying, not because they've earned it all back, because the alternative is to die with a closed fist, and I've buried enough people to know that's no way to go. Marin is the gift I never saw coming. My granddaughter, she's a hospice nurse of all things. Wade's kindness in her, plain as day. She drives up from Cincinnati every other weekend. She calls me Grandpa Cal like she's been saying it her whole life. She found a few old photos of Wade as a boy that I'd thought were lost, and we sat at the kitchen table one night, and she let me tell her every story I had about her father, the good ones, the ones I'd been holding all those years with nobody to give them to. I'd grieved my son alone for a decade. Now there's a piece of him sitting across from me drinking my bad Folgers and laughing at the same jokes Faye used to laugh at. Faye is failing. I'll be honest with you about that, because you've come this far with me and you deserve the truth. The good days are fewer. Most afternoons now she doesn't know who I am. But here's the thing I've learned, sitting beside her in that courtyard while the autumn comes on red and gold through the big windows. She may not know my name, but she knows my hand. I take hers, and something in her settles. Whoever I am to her in that moment, I'm safe, and that's enough. Last Tuesday, she looked at me out of nowhere, clear as a bell, and said, "There you are," like I'd just walked in from a long day on the polls, and then she was gone again. But I got that. That's 3 words, and I'll have them when I've got nothing else. I spent the best years of my life believing the thing I owed my children was money, a head start, a leg up, a number in an account that proved I'd amounted to something. I was wrong about nearly all of it. The 200,000 I gave with both hands is gone, and the boy who got it tried to take the rest. And the daughter I almost lost. I'm getting back not over money, but over a hairbrush and a magazine and 1,000 small days of showing up. I sold a truck I loved to buy one quiet dinner and one moment of standing up out of a chair. Cheapest thing I ever bought, because what I got for it was my wife's hand held in both of hers, and a granddaughter I didn't know I had. And the plain, hard knowledge of who in this world is mine, and who only ever saw me as a balance to be drawn down. So if there's anybody in your life draining you in the dark while they smile at your table, go to the bank, print it all out. Find yourself a good lawyer, and don't say a word until you're ready. And then stand up. You're never too old to stand up. I'm 73. I got a paid-off house I'll never sign over, a wife whose hand still knows mine, a daughter learning the long way that love is something you do and not just something you say, and a granddaughter who calls me on Sunday nights. The money's gone, and I've never in my life been richer. I just had to lose nearly everything to learn how to count it. For weeks after that dinner, half the men at my lodge told me I should have thrown the table over the second my son-in-law opened his mouth. They meant it kind, but I've come to believe the worst thing I could have done that night was lose my temper, because anger would have handed Grant exactly the story he wanted. A confused old man making a scene. The reason his face went grey instead of mine was that I'd spent 8 quiet weeks doing unglamorous thing, printing statements, sitting in Miss Renfro's office, checking forged dates against my own dentist's appointment card. Patience isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sharpest tool a man owns, and I learned that lesson far too late. The other thing I had to hold on to was simpler and harder. I never forged a page, never lied on a single line, never moved a dollar. I didn't have the right to move, and that's the whole reason the truth flattened them when I laid it on the tablecloth. Grant cut every corner there was, and the corners caught up with him, the way they always do. You can't out-scheme a keen ledger. If I'd fought him dirty just to win, I'd have spent whatever years I got left looking over my shoulder. Instead, I sleep fine. There's a kind of peace that only comes from knowing your own hands are clean, and I wouldn't trade it for the $68,000 he stole. And I had to keep getting up. That's the part nobody prints on a thumbnail. Selling my granddad's rifle, selling that old truck out in Caledonia, and riding home in a stranger's car without letting myself look back. Brushing Faye's hair on the morning she didn't know my face. Driving to Columbus on no sleep to build a case against my own daughter's husband. There were nights I wanted to lie down and let them have all of it, just to make the tired stop. I didn't. I'm not telling you that to sound like a hero. I'm telling you because if you're sitting where I sat, you need to hear that the strength comes one day at a time, and you only ever need enough for the day in front of you. Here's what the money never taught me. Faye still doesn't know my name most afternoons, but she knows my hand. My daughter is learning, slow and humble, that love is a thing you do with a hairbrush on a bad day, not a thing you announce at a fancy dinner. And Marant, Wade's girl, the granddaughter I'd grieved without ever meeting, calls me every Sunday night. I lost the farm, the truck, $200,000, and a decade with my son. I'll never get back. But I stood up out of that chair an honest man, eyes open, back unbent. That, it turns out, was the only inheritance ever worth leaving behind.